All right, everybody, we are back again for another episode of the Coach's Compass, a whole new season, season number 3, and this is all talking about financial literacy. We got my boy Rico reporting live out of the UK. Now, remember, hit that like, subscribe, comment button down below so we can continue to have this thing grow, continue to bring on cool guests from all across the world, and continue to give you guys knowledge about literally everything in this whole world that we got going on. But my boy Rico is going to talk to us a little bit today about crypto, stocks, and retirement. Some of the stuff is going to sound like it's way over your head, but I told him to simplify it for us people that are really, really simple people. Right? So, Rico, pleasure to have you on, brother.
Pleasure to be here, man. I appreciate you inviting me on, and I'm excited to be here.
Man, so let's dive into this crypto world. So, like, there's a lot of different ones out there, right? You got Bitcoin, you got Dogecoin, you got AV, you got Ethereum. What does all of this mean? And where should people even start when it comes to the crypto world? Because it's confusing when you first look at it and it's like something you can't really touch. Now, Bitcoin is becoming more and more popular. Obviously, in El Salvador, you can use it. In America, it's starting to become a currency. Like some places you can use these cryptos, but not a lot of us are going to trust something that we can't even physically hold and use. So what is the crypto world and where should people get started when they're looking into it?
So, in terms of like what it is and where it comes from and all of that, so the best way I can think about it is all crypto is it's a currency, it's a digital currency. Like you said, you can't hold it, you can't touch it. But imagine you've got obviously all of the money we have online anyway, as the world is changing. You've got all of that, but all crypto does is it removes banks, it removes governments, it removes institutions from that. So it gives you a currency that you can use that there's basically no middleman in the way of your money, you accessing your money, you using it. So it's online, you can't touch it. Not a lot of people are finding that, neither am I. The saying cash is king was a saying for so long for a reason. But the way it works is it's controlled by no one. It's run by no one. Even the person who created it, who's kind of a mystery man, even he doesn't touch it, doesn't get involved. He lets it self-manage itself. So the best way that I can describe it is in terms of why it's so beneficial for everyone in the world and why it's growing so much and becoming a key thing is imagine you're someone who you can't pay, you don't have dollars, but you have to pay something in dollars. You don't have a choice. You have to pay something in dollars, but you've only got pounds. You've got to then go exchange your pounds either electronically or in person. Go in, exchange it. You've got to go to a middleman. You've got to pay these fees, lose some of your money because of the exchange rates and etc. Now, what Bitcoin allows you to do is if I've got all of my money and all my funds in Bitcoin, I can very easily swap that Bitcoin for dollars. I can swap that Bitcoin for pounds. I can swap it for yen. I can swap it for euros. There's no middleman. Technically, there's no exchange rate. Obviously, there is an exchange rate but that's based on Bitcoin's value. It's not based on what a company has decided. So it's removed that middleman, and it basically gives you the freedom to have these transactions without being limited, and you can pay for everything and everyone with it. Now, as you've just said, countries like El Salvador, I know that the US is on the way. I know here in the UK it's becoming something, is that you'll be able to live your life and pay everything in Bitcoin directly. But as of right now, it's still very young and it's very new. And the benefits of it that kind of allows us to do is if I want to send you money, I'm in the UK, you're in the US, that could be quite difficult because sometimes our banks don't interact. I can send you Bitcoin like this with no problem. And there you go. I've now paid you. You've got your money. If you want to, you can turn that Bitcoin into dollars. You can keep it in Bitcoin. You can turn it into pounds. You can turn it into euros. And there you go. You've got the money. You've got the transaction. It's incredibly safe and it's incredibly secure. Because in terms of ownership, you basically have a private key. So a private key is like a password, a very special password that gives you and only you access to your crypto. So even that money that very technically can't be taken away and accessed by anyone else. To give you an example, if the government tries to seize your Bitcoin, they can't access your Bitcoin unless you give them the password. So that Bitcoin is safe, locked and secured, no matter what. they can't access and take that away from you. They may be able to take away the specific computer or the specific technology or even USB that has the Bitcoin on it, but they can never ever access that unless you give them permission to. So it just gives you a bit more control and security when it comes to those things. And in terms of another security feature, there was something called the blockchain. And what the blockchain is effectively a public record of all transactions that is used with Bitcoin. And what that allows you to also do is it means that Bitcoin can never ever be copied or fraudulently made or stolen. Imagine you have a Bitcoin, and imagine all of the Bitcoin in the world is a puzzle. Every Bitcoin specifically is a different shaped puzzle that is unique to itself. So once you spend it, swap it, anything, you put it in that puzzle, it can't be copied and it can't be mimicked, it can't be anything. It is unique to itself. And that is another thing that makes it so secure and quite safe. Now, the issue that we do have as a whole with crypto right now is that society isn't quite fully prepared for it. So it's all good, having a car that can travel at 300 miles an hour, but do we have roads that can take a car that can handle 300 miles an hour? That's kind of the
No.
issue we've got with cryptocurrency right now, is that, we've got this vehicle, this tool that can be very beneficial for society and for people, but we don't quite have the infrastructure for it yet. So that's where some of the issues can creep in, and that's where you can hear the issues of people sometimes getting scammed. People thinking that they're buying crypto and they're not. The stories of people's crypto being taken from them because they've passed on the information, not realizing that they really shouldn't be doing it the way they're doing it. So that's really the main issue with it. And not to become a conspiracy theorist, as you can imagine, there's certain financial institutions that do not like Bitcoin either, because it removes their power. JP Morgan and Warren Buffett, these are two financial, obviously JP Morgan's an institution, Warren Buffett's some known as the greatest investor of all time. They're both very against it. Now, they have their reasons, but there will be a lot of people that will say the reason they're against it is because they can't control it, because it removes their power. Once Bitcoin and cryptocurrency becomes mainstream, organizations like your JP Morgans, certain banks won't have as much power as they have now, because we don't need them, because we have the blockchain and we have each other, and that is all I need. I don't need to go to JP Morgan to transfer my $100 million of Bitcoin. All I do is I send you a very specific code, you send me a very specific code, you give me the details, it's exchanged on the blockchain, and there we go. We have now removed a middleman from a $100 million transaction, just to give you an example. But so in terms of the different cryptocurrencies involved, they all have different uses. So Bitcoin is obviously your mainstream one. That tends to be the one that I say if people want to get involved, that's where they should stick, because that's the one that the world is the most prepared for. Like you said, you've got Dogecoin, which was a bit of a meme coin, as they called it. And one of the negatives of cryptocurrency is that as of right now, because of the lack of infrastructure, the price of it can sometimes be very easily manipulated. Dogecoin jumped up just because Elon Musk sent a tweet out, and then sometime later it crashed again because people realized it actually had no intrinsic value. So that's the negative. Bitcoin's a bit more protected from that because there's a bit more infrastructure involved and it's been developed longer. But there are those risks still because, like I said, it's all good having the cars, but we don't have the roads. And that's kind of where we stand with it.
Yeah, but because Bitcoin costs a lot just to buy one Bitcoin. So how would somebody know how much money to put into it and what is the value of so say somebody put $100 into Bitcoin, but a Bitcoin costs $10,000. What's the value of that?
So it's exactly the way you have to look at it is yes, one Bitcoin is at, let's say, such that high rate. You can get yourself just $100 worth of Bitcoin and you own $100 worth of Bitcoin. Yes, you don't own an entire Bitcoin, but the reason that's not so drastically a problem is that another reason Bitcoin is very different to what they call fiat money, which is what we know as standard money, is that there is a limited amount of Bitcoin. But unlike, standard money where banks can just print cash and countries can just print cash, there is a very finite amount of Bitcoin, and effectively, once it's all been mined, which in plain English is, when they say mine, they use computers effectively to work, to do very advanced coding and mathematical problems, and you get little bits of Bitcoin for for the computer solving those problems. Once it's all been mined, that is it. There will not be any more. So there is absolutely no problem with owning $100 worth of Bitcoin, even if that means that you only own 0.00001% of Bitcoin, because that $100 that you've bought of Bitcoin, still, no matter, even if it's just 1%, it still has that value of $100 worth of Bitcoin. And if the price of Bitcoin then doubles, you've now got $200 worth of Bitcoin, even if it's not an entire Bitcoin. So it's not so much of a problem not being able to purchase an entire one. And there's a lot of systems and apps, with technology that allow you to do that. You can download an app and you can say, I want to invest $200 in Bitcoin. You invest your 200, and now you own $200 worth of Bitcoin. It may only be 0.00002% of a Bitcoin, let's say, but its value is there. And if the price of Bitcoin rises, the price of your percentage rises. And, it's actually quite, not to jump the gun, but that's very similar nowadays to how a lot of people invest in the stock market,
Which was my next question. Like how, because
Yeah.
now we talk about investing that money into crypto, but like there's a whole other side of things. Like now there's stocks, right? Like it's hard to know where to start on like how much money you should put in here and what you should trust, and like how to do it in a way that's not going to lose you money, but like at the end of the day, gain you money in a way that is beneficial to you. Because like it's hard to put your money in something that you can't really like see like what's coming back from it and how much you're going to get back from it. Because people that aren't like in finance like yourself or studied this, like we're kind of just like, all right, what can work for us outside of our own day-to-day work and still earn us money without us losing that money that we put in, even though we pretty much lose money regardless. Like if you don't reinvest in yourself or whatever your craft is, you're going out and spending money on food, clothes, all that stuff, right? That's technically an investment because you got to wear the clothes, you got to eat and all that stuff. But now we're talking about a world that you can't really see, and then you see the ups and downs, and you're like, okay, should I put $100 here? Should I put $200 here? Like, where do you start with that?
Of course. When it comes to stuff like that, so with the crypto market, everyone's got loads of different opinions on it, because some people like it, some people don't, some people think it's good, some people think it's bad. With the stock market, it is a little bit simpler. It just requires, there's options in terms of balancing risk to reward and how much time you want to contribute to it. So in terms of a stock in its simplest form is a piece of that is what a stock is. One stock is a percentage of a company. It can be a large percentage, it can be an absolute tiny piece, but in its basis, you're owning a piece of a company. So if I buy, let's go with companies people know. You've got Apple. If I want, if an Apple share, this isn't where it is, but if an Apple share was $100 and they had 100 shares, and I buy one of those shares, I now own 1% of Apple as a stock. If Apple does well, the stock price goes up because the value of the company goes up, and therefore the value of my stock goes up. Now and if I sell it, I've now made money. If it gives me dividends, which is basically money you get back for owning the stock, even better. Well, vice versa, if I buy a stock in a company and it does bad, the stock price, or something bad happens, the stock price goes down because, less people want to own that stock. The company's less valuable, therefore the price goes down. In terms of risk reward, there are many ways of balancing it. There are very, very safe options that have lower reward and lower risk. It's never zero risk, it's only ever lower risk. And the other way, there's high. So, one of the safest ways to invest on the stock market a lot of the time is to put it in, mutual funds, or to put it into certain portfolios that track all of the most successful companies. So one of the best examples that I always ever use is the S&P 500. So the S&P 500 is basically a fund that tracks the stocks of the most successful and the largest companies in the world. So there is actually a requirement for a company to be in the S&P 500, which is a certain amount of success, a certain amount of value in the company, and etc. If a company starts to perform badly, it will be removed from the S&P 500. Effectively, what will happen is if you invest in a fund that tracks the S&P 500, and let's say at the start of the year, again, I'm just throwing out numbers because I never want to go into specifics of what it exactly is today. But let's say the S&P 500 to own a share in that mutual fund is $500. If that goes up, that might go up 5% one week, drop 10, go up 15, it will bounce all the way up. But on average, for the past 50 years, the S&P 500 has gone up 10%, between 8 and 10% every year. That's on average. So it'll go up 10, drop 9, go up 11, drop 20, go up 30. It'll bounce all the way through, but at the end of the year, it often is 10% higher than when it started. So now that $500 that you put in, by the end of that year, if we're going to stick to a straight line year, is now worth 550. So now that investment has gone up in value. And that's a safer option because that is a long-term investment. Slow gain. And then what will happen is now you've got 550 invested. So if now that 550 goes up by 10% again, instead of you just gaining $50 like you did, you're going to gain 55 because it's going to compound. Because it's 10% of 550, not 10% of 500. So that's why when it comes to the safer option, it's often long-term investing, buying and holding and being patient with it. In terms of your higher risk, the stock market can be very volatile in terms of individual stocks. So a stock one day can be worth $1, the next day it can be worth 20. And obviously if you've bought 10 shares at $1 and then they jump up to 20, you've made a lot of money percentage-wise. But the risk at the same time is if you buy 100 shares worth 10, and then it drops to $5, you've lost a lot of money because the value of it has dropped down as well. So it can go both ways. And that's why the different options, day traders obviously will do the buying, the selling, but they are also, they're looking at specific performance numbers of companies, how much money they have, how much money they're spending. A lot of the time they're predicting, have they developed a new product? Have they not? If you want to invest in a pharmaceutical company and they get a new drug that they've developed for 10 years approved for sale, that stock's going to become 10 times more valuable because they now have a new drug that's going to flood the market. So that, however, if you invest in a pharmaceutical company that has spent hundreds of millions of dollars developing a drug and it doesn't get approved, that company is now going to drop in value because they've spent all of this money and they're going to get nothing for it. And that's quite a good example, I think, of how a stock can jump and can drop and different things can affect it. And it's in its hindsight, it can be simple, it can be confusing, but there's loads of easy ways that people can get involved now. I personally, I like to keep it quite simple, and I like to go long term. So I like to put a lot of my money into the S&P 500, the Dow Jones, the FTSE 100. These are all funds that track certain companies that meet certain requirements, and that tends to be the safer option. So if you want to just put 100, 200, 300, however much spare you have into these funds, and I often say, try and forget it. The market will always win. We live in a capitalist society. The market will always win in the end. Even after lockdown, when every company went down, they are now way higher than they ever were before the pandemic. Capitalism and the market will always win. Countries and companies will always make the decisions that benefit. So a lot of the time, there's a lot of opportunity to succeed. But at the same time, you need to be prepared to lose, because I have lost, and experts will lose. There have been many, many financial gurus, as they call themselves, who thought they knew absolutely everything, and they lost everything because in its hindsight, as much as research and maths and planning you can do, you can't. Predicting the stock market is still a best guess. There isn't a science. There isn't a snake oil. You may do everything right, but there's a controversy happening in the company that you don't know about, and that destroys its share price. So it's all about just balancing the risk and reward that you have and you want. And there's loads of easy ways of getting involved. There's apps. Vanguard is a very big popular one, both in the UK and in the US. Vanguard's a massive money and managing organization. You've got BlackRock. It's another one. That's an investment bank. Loads of insurance companies in the UK will now also manage it for you. So there's loads of options that you can get involved in, and some of them will have range from 0% fees to some of them will have a small percentage up to a certain amount invested that people can get involved with.
Yeah, I know in the States we have Schwab, we have Fidelity.
Yeah, exactly.
There's also Robinhood.
Robinhood was big. Yeah.
Yeah, but it almost sounds like it's like gambling. Like when you talk about the stock market, like getting into it and putting your money into it, because it's almost like you're thinking, you're looking at these gurus and all this stuff. You're looking at the plays of like when it's going up, when it's going down. It's almost like sports betting, right? Like when you're looking at what team is playing what team and when you put your money in, when you should take it out, like when is a good time to kind of invest in it. It's also like looking at what team is playing against each other. What's the better matchup? Should I bet on the over? Should I bet on the under? Right? Should I bet on the spread? Like it almost sounds exactly like that, but you talk about like the long-term game and the S&P 500s, the ETFs, all that stuff. How does that lead into the retirement side of it? Like, because can you use stocks in your retirement, and how will it benefit to kind of just let it sit and like let it grow by itself? Because you said the house always wins, right? It's almost like when you go to the casino, right? The house usually always wins, but like now you're betting on these companies, and you're kind of like waiting for them to grow. How do you forget about it? Because like you're now thinking like you're telling somebody, hey, put $500 in here, and then kind of like 10 years from now, then it will pay you off. Man, I might not have $500 to just kind of let sit and wait. I might need that back.
No, in terms of I'll be honest. I am very comfortable saying when people compare the stock market to gambling, I'm very comfortable to say in its purest form, it kind of is, because no matter how sure we are, we're never 100% sure of anything. We're just not. And it's the same it's like sports. Are we 100% sure that the Chiefs are going to beat the Giants? We're 99% sure because they're the better team. But are we ever 100% sure that they're not going to have a bad game?
Any given Sunday.
Any given
Sunday, man.
Exactly. That's the game. That's the sport we play. And I'll be honest, there's a lot of financial people who I think go off of egos who say, no. If you always look at the numbers, you'll always be right. I disagree. Because like I said, a good example recently was Volkswagen. Volkswagen is one of the largest car manufacturers, historically very well known, very trustworthy, right? Everything about it means that stock price just keep creeping up. And then they had their issue where they were falsifying their results of the CO2. The stock absolutely took a massive crumble. Now, no one could have predicted that. We couldn't have predicted that they were fraudulently hiding results. That's not something that research is going to find unless you're on the inside, which is why insider trading is so illegal, because you have such an advantage. So, if I know that they're doing something wrong and then suddenly I short the stock, which means I'm betting on it going down, and that's how I make money on it, that's illegal because that's an unfair advantage. So unless you have an illegal unfair advantage, no one knows if it's going up, down, or left or right. So I'm perfectly fine with people saying it's like gambling, because it can be, but it's just about what's the safer option. That's what's the smarter option. And in terms of connecting it to retirement funds, it links almost seamlessly. So the same way you can create an investment account with a Vanguard, with BlackRock, with anything like that, you can create investment funds that do the same thing. So to give an example, myself, my employer, I have an investment fund and I pay a certain amount of my salary, obviously not too much because I don't have 500 to be putting away and forgetting about it. I like to, times are like that.
They get tough, yeah.
It gets tough. It gets cold. Bills go up.
Yeah.
But if I can spare, for just as a random number, if I can spare £100 every month out of my paycheck to put in an investment fund that my employer has set up for me, because employers have to do that now in the UK, it was a legislation. my employer will often match that and also put in another 100. So I'm putting in 100. My employer's putting in 100. So let's say there's now 200 going in. That's going in to an investment account that I cannot access until I hit retirement age. So I'm 27 now. So I think retirement age for me will be about 66. So I will keep doing that. So every month, let's say 200 is going in. Now, certain investment accounts will manage it for you because the company will deal with that. But also you have the option to say, I want my investment account to be put to follow the S&P 500, exactly as if I'm investing. So my retirement money goes in the S&P 500. And for 66 years, all of the money I go in will effectively be invested in the S&P 500. So if the S&P 500 goes up 10% every year on average, by the end of that, obviously I've got a lot more money than I've invested. I've got more money because my employer has put in, and then I've also got more money because it's been jumping and jumping and jumping. So I know in the US, you guys have the Roth IRA, I believe.
Yep.
That's a very similar system where you put money in, it's protected, it's taxed when it goes in. However, to withdraw it, once you reach the retirement age that they deemed for it, which I believe is 59 and a half, and the Roth IRA has been open for long enough, which is about, I think, this 5 years, you can now withdraw that money without tax, without penalty. So then you can then live off of that. You know, it's not a crazy thing. One thing I'm aware of is one of the largest pension accounts globally by an employer is done by the NYPD. So the NYPD has one of the largest investment accounts in the world, and it's the pensions of its police officers. The NYPD invests that, so the money is often managed by I'm not exactly sure who, so I'm not going to pretend and say I know who manages it, but there'll be people involved whose job is purely to put that into safe investments, very low risk. It might be slow growth, but let's say you've got $1 million because it's the pension fund for the entire NYPD. You've got $1 million and the fund goes up by 10%. You've now added 100,000 to that pension fund in 1 year. And then when you do that again, so it's now 1,100,000, 10%, you've now added 110,000 to the pension account. So in 2 years, on a very safe investment, the pension account has gone from 1 million to 1.21 million. It links very easily and very seamlessly, and there's a lot of options to do it through your employer, or to do it, you can even do it yourself. You can set up your own pension account through, I know in the US you can do it via Bank of America, Chase, Wells Fargo, the big boys. And again, you can do it safely, slowly, long term. Now, the reason we say forget is that it's an old saying in investment that you put your money in and then you forget you've put it in. And you just keep putting it in, because then a lot of the time, the more you can mess with the stocks, sometimes, the more you move it is sometimes when the risk starts to go up. So if you put it in a safe option and just forget about it, you then come back in 20, 30, 40 years when you're in retirement age, and now you've got that money waiting for you for retirement. Like I said, it requires nuance. When I say forget about it, I'm not telling someone to lose 500 a month and act like that's not going anywhere. It is going somewhere, of course. But when I was training and studying and doing the finance stuff, it was a saying. You put your money in the investment and forget it's there. It's not money to be spent. It's no longer your money. It's 60-year-old Enrique's money. And that's how you look at it. And it's a very simple way. But like I said, it's all risk reward. Compound interest is a very, very powerful thing, because 10%, and then the next year it's 10% of the new amount, and then 10% of that new amount, and 10% of that new amount, and now suddenly that money, you see the curves that just jump up. And that's exactly actually how Warren Buffett made his money. Warren Buffett, a lot of his money was made in his later years, because his investments, they started, then they crept, and then it was 10% more, 10% more, 10% more, 10% more, 10% more. And it just keeps jumping. Patience is very valuable. It's a good virtue when it comes to finance and investment.
And I guess that goes into a lot of us as coaches and athletes that say, trust the process, right?
Exactly.
We say you got to be patient with it. Like, it's not going to happen in one day. So coaches, athletes out there, do yourselves a favor. Look at 50, 60-year-old self and say, hey, I don't want to be working as hard as I did back in the day. So go ahead and start saving some money, start putting in some stocks, look into some crypto, look into your retirement funds. But by no means am I a financial advisor. I'm not giving you financial advice or telling you what to do. I'm just kind of giving you some guidelines on some things that are out there and the options
I
to
will
do
say the
with your
exact
money so
same
it
thing.
starts working for yourself.
I'm not a financial
You
advisor.
know, gotta
I'm not
gotta add that
giving
disclaimer.
financial advice, but I'm giving. I felt like I can explain it the best way I see and how it works for me. And as an athlete as well, I'm hoping that other athletes who maybe had never even considered it just feel a little bit more comfortable about these things.
Right. When you go out there and spend 100,000 on that chain, go ahead and put 100,000 in that retirement too. You
Yes,
never know
sir.
what's gonna come back to you.
There was that
There
video
you
from
go.
Marshall Lynch. He said that.
Yes,
When he
sir.
spent
Yes, sir. Before you go over
20
to
on the
that
white,
jeweler, go ahead and go over to that financial.
go with the
Yeah.
financial advisor. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it. Rico, I appreciate you dropping in today, bro, and appreciate that knowledge. You really simplified things because now even I understand it a little bit more. Even though I started in the stocks about 2 months ago. Now it helps me understand where I need to be looking at and how to navigate through this crypto world. So I appreciate you, bro, and can't wait to drop this episode.
Appreciate you having me on, and I'm grateful for it. I'm always happy to share a little bit of knowledge for everyone's betterment.
And we're out.